Ja, herzlich willkommen zurück.
Well, a very warm welcome to all of you. Welcome back to the forum, and we hope that you have been able to refresh yourself. Unfortunately, this has only been a virtual coffee break. This Franco-German Energy Forum for climate change, Europe post-COVID-19 is what we call this. With a slight degree of optimism, I'm Angela Ulrich from the ID studio here in Berlin. At some point in time, I was also a correspondent in France, and we're also busy with climate and energy issues. Ever since this morning, we've heard a number of statements already, of presentations already on the European Green Deal, on the sustainable turnaround in energy, on climate protection in industry. And now we'd like to talk about what sort of courses need to be charted for the energy transition, because this year is a crucial year, is a decisive year. COVID has brought home to all of us what can happen and how people can actually stand together if needs be. But this is also applied to energy transition, to climate policy. This is exactly what this meeting here, after all, is all about. This first panel is one that is devoted primarily to what politicians can do, ought to do, must do. I'd like to hear from my panelists here from France, from Germany, from Poland. Time is of the essence, as we've heard. So challenges and perspectives of energy policy, and I would like tonight to give the floor first and foremost to Sophie Moulin. Welcome her, who is Director for Energy at the Directorate General for Energy and Climate in the French Ministry for Ecological Change. She has, as Vice Director, for example, of the Agency for Nuclear Safety, been dealing with this particular thing. Welcome. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for the invitation to play an active. I've got an echo. I don't know. On one language channel, I have an echo. Maybe I need to turn down my volume.
Ich möchte erst noch alle anderen mit einladen und vorstellen.
I'd like please to introduce to the other participants. The speaker is continuing. We're talking about the future of Europe and the climate, and as this is so important, as far as France is concerned, as you are probably aware, then let's just listen, says the moderator. In France, we've been looking at the full spectrum of these policies. In terms of carbon neutrality, of course, the first line of work, the first fundamental point, is energy efficiency. And so our first line of action needs to be to cut consumption. That's absolutely indispensable if we're going to reach our target. The second line of action, then, is decarbonization of our entire energy consumption. In France, if we begin with our electricity mix, we have this specific feature that our electricity is very much decarbonized because we invested in previous decades in hydroelectricity, in our nuclear generation, and in other renewable energy forms that we've been cultivating now for the last 15 years. This development has enabled us to close about 10 gigawatts of fossil-based energy generation since 2012. And to do that, we've also aimed to exit coal by 2022. And we're going to continue these objective of achieving a 40% renewable share of our energy mix by 2040. We have a long-term objective looking beyond 2035 because we know that between 2035 and 2040 we are going to have to renew almost the entire fleet of power stations. So we have an opportunity to rejiggle our energy mix. Our priority with this power mix and decarbonization now has to be to decarbonize the other sectors. We have some major objectives for buildings, transportation, and heavy industry. For decarbonization in buildings, our target is to gradually exit the use of fossil fuels, a progressive shift to other forms of fuel. And we have a number of incentives and support available for savings in the energy field and for the use of renewables in all kinds of buildings. In transportation, we're covering the full spectrum of e-mobility with investments there too, major investments, in order to decarbonize the transport sector, and with a range of solutions depending on the mode of transport, from cars through to heavy-duty trucks. We've focused in particular on decarbonizing heavy industry, above all through electrification, but not only that, because some processes are difficult to electrify, and decarbonization can be achieved in other ways too, for example, by shifting to carbon-free hydrogen, where this is more appropriate. We've set up public support to hugely support heating based on renewables and other specific sectors. Why? Well, in spite of the crisis, in April 2020, during the French lockdown, we published a paper, a multi-annual energy program, which fixes the roadmap for energy with regard to two targets. One is 2023 and the other is 2028. And France, like many other European countries, has, during the COVID crisis, set up a recovery plan for the economy, which was published at the end of August, and where there are a number of lines relating to action around the energy transition and the shift towards decarbonization by investing, for example, hugely in hydrogen. Right across these sectors, just to conclude, perhaps I'd like to underline the importance of European cooperation. It's important, I think, for two reasons in particular. The first is the need for coordination, because especially in the field of power, we are very interconnected, and the choices that we make in one country will have repercussions for our neighbours. And that is mutual, of course. So we need to look together at our supply systems and our choices in energy policy. We have to make sure that we can achieve synergies with our neighbours. It's already the case today, and it's absolutely essential to maintain this close cooperation if we're going to follow that road together. The other important aspect of European cooperation is that it enables us to avoid duplications and to broaden our efforts, to pool and broaden our efforts by focusing together on technologies and options and energy policies. That enables us to develop particular activities across Europe. That's very important so that we don't build greater dependencies in Europe on supplies from outside. If we invest together, we can develop the energy sectors and cut costs. And I'd just like to underpin the German presidency's commitment in the EU, which is taking place under very unusual conditions during the second half of 2020. And we support the German presidency in their initiatives, for example, for offshore wind, hydrogen, just as we support the work that's being done on the recovery of the climate program across Europe for 2030. I just wanted to share those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie Morland, for this first overview from France, and I would now like to use this opportunity to introduce both two remaining panelists, Stephanie from Ahlefeld, who is the head of the Directorate General Energy Policy, Electricity and Grids in the Chancellery. While she was there, she organized the Energy Summit meetings, also dealt a lot with the Renewable Energy Act, and is now in the Ministry of Economics, responsible for energy policy. A very warm welcome to you, Ms. van Ahlefeld. And next will be obviously a man in this panel. I would like to now look to Poland, to Adam Gibourget-Czetwertyński, who was one of the people who prepared the Katowice Climate Summit, knows only too well the Brussels negotiations, worked there also in the Environmental Directorate as a representative of Poland. So a very warm welcome to you, sir. I would like to Ms. Moulin started as a kickoff and as regards the transition of industry, of the overall situation there. I would like to perhaps address my first words to Frau van Ahlefeld. How do you see this crucial year 2020? Where do you see the greatest challenges for Germany? Thank you very much, and thank you very much also for the introduction and also the invitation to this panel. I am delighted to be on this panel together with my French and my Polish colleague and discuss also cooperation in Europe. I think this cooperation is of the essence. As Ms. Moulin has already said, as regards electricity, for example, we depend very much on each other, and these interdependencies will continue to grow. So what we need is a basic understanding in Europe as to which direction we wish to take in energy policy. We would like to use our rotating presidency in the European Union in order to foster this common understanding. So I would like to thank both my colleagues for supporting us during our presidency. That is most important to us and a valuable support. We're glad to have you with us. Now, as to Germany, already last year, but also in the first few months of this year, we took very far-reaching decisions. For example, we introduced a fuel trading scheme for those sectors where the European ETS scheme is not really covering those sectors. We have adopted an ambitious climate program that also addresses mobility, that also addresses building efficiency and other areas that are important in this respect, and that also gives an important input and has given an important input to our energy and climate plan. We also launched a Renewable Energy Act review. Right now, this is deliberated by our parliament. We wish to see to it that 35% of our electricity consumption comes from renewables in 2023. That is a very ambitious goal. If you look at energy consumption and electricity consumption in Germany, offshore wind and onshore wind will play a very important role in this respect, and we also hope for cooperation with our neighboring states, that we can tap further potential there, and obviously Poland and France are our immediate neighbors and the first port of call for us. We also have, as you know, launched a very ambitious phasing out of coal. The aim is to, at the very latest by 2038, have left coal completely. That obviously gives rise to a number of questions as regards our grids, as regards energy supply, safety of our energy supply. We're working on this, but we know that a lot of people are asking whether this ambitious goal can be met. Well, my answer would be it can be met if each and everyone pulls in the same direction. This is in parallel to phasing out nuclear energy, so there's a bit of a difference here with France, because there are many areas where we are very ambitious indeed as regards both phasing out coal and nuclear at one and the same time. On this and then, last but not least, I would like to mention our national hydrogen strategy. That too is a very ambitious project. We launched this in the first quarter of this year. We addressed a number of priorities here for giving a boost to electrolysis. We know also that this is an issue that needs to be brought forward at the European level. We need to promote it at the European level because it doesn't really make sense if each and every member country is trying to go it alone in state-of-the-art technology here. European projects, European cooperation is obviously the best policy to come to this ambitious goal. Later on, let's leave it at that. Later on, I will come back to this gladly. Ms. van Aleveld, thank you very much. You have already raised a number of issues that we will address later, certainly. So as our third panelist, I would like to address our Polish colleague. Poland is starting from a different vantage point. We have France that relies very much on nuclear. We have Germany that's going to phase out a number of sources of energy. But you in Poland also have ambitious goals, although you rely quite significantly on coal. So what do you see as your greatest challenge?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to present a bit of the strategy and the plans we have for the future of the energy system in Poland. I think we do share a lot of common challenges and with both France and Germany, but also we obviously have our specificities. I mean, we're all in it for the same goal. We want to achieve a climate neutral EU by 2050. Obviously, we'll have a bit different path in our different member states because of the points we start with. I mean, in Poland we have, for instance, 80% coal. In Germany it's more like 40%, and in France it's almost 0%. So obviously the size of the challenge is hugely different. You know how big of a challenge it is to phase out coal in Germany, going down from these slightly less actually than 40%. You can imagine how much bigger the challenge is in Poland. We have a preliminary agreement with our trade unions to close the last coal mine in 2049, and we're working out the details now in talks with our trade unions. But we are decided in Poland to transition towards climate neutrality, and to do that we believe it is necessary to aim for a zero emission energy system, and in our case we want to rely mostly on developing renewables on one side and using also nuclear power to provide the base load in the system. I mentioned obviously the challenges that we have with coal in Poland. I mean, one of them is for the production of electricity, which is an important part of our mix. But another one is also with heating, and in this case, it's actually really an exception almost. I would say on European scale, because actually 85% of the coal that is being consumed in households across Europe is consumed in Poland. So it is really a challenge that exists almost nowhere else, or nowhere else at the size at which we have to face it in Poland. And for that reason also we see in that transition phase towards a zero emission system, we see a role also for gas to be played. But as I said, the first pillar of our new zero emission energy system will be renewables, and there I believe we face also a lot of the same challenges and see a lot of the same opportunities with our French and German colleagues. I mean, we have similar challenges about the development of renewables. We are also all aiming at developing offshore wind. In Poland, we're aiming at having almost 6 gigawatts by 2030 of offshore wind, and we are developing also international cooperation around the Baltic Sea we organized a joint declaration of all the PEMIP members to push together in the direction of a better integration of our national policies to help for the development of offshore wind in the Baltic. And we also see a huge role for hydrogen, for biogas, as we see these technologies as a possibility to decarbonize the existing gas infrastructure, and also in the case of hydrogen, a huge role of that technology to transform further sectors of the economy beyond energy, in industry, maybe as well in long distance transport, and also as a tool to better integrate those sectors together, and to ensure better stability of the grid and increase the energy storage capacity that we have. So all in all, I think a lot of the issues I mentioned here that we see from our perspective are very similar to the ones I heard from my colleagues, and I think if we manage together in Europe to set a transition towards a climate neutral economy, I think that can be a model not only for other European member states but also for other countries in the world, how we can successfully transition towards climate neutrality.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Guibaut-Czetwertyński.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guibaut-Czetwertyński, for these first insights into the Polish market. And I have a question to you. When you spoke about you're looking towards Germany in phasing out coal, obviously you said quite rightly so that this is a much larger dimension for you. Perhaps you can briefly tell us a little bit, and I enjoin all to be very brief in their answers. What could Poland learn from your neighboring country, Germany? Because it is a very expensive proposition. We give compensation to our entrepreneurs. We also give structural aid to the region as such. What is important for you?
Well, I think that definitely the German experience and the experience of other countries in general in how this transition can be managed to ensure a just transition for these regions, to ensure that these regions that are, and we have very similar situations I think in Poland and Germany for some of these mining regions that are really dependent on this activity currently. How can we ensure that we develop new opportunities, new sectors, new infrastructure that will help create jobs, quality jobs in those regions? And I think that if we manage to enable such a just transition, that will really be a major contribution for the transition as well of other industrialized mining nations in the world.
My
next question is addressed to Madame Mollon. Ms. Mollon, you yourself described to us how you wish to render France more efficient, make it to use up less energy, and enjoin your French countrymen to have more cooperation with others. It's the most important component in your energy mix, however, is nuclear energy, which is becoming more and more expensive, more and more prone to possibly accidents. So how can you ensure that you can continue to use nuclear without it being too expensive for your country?
Merci pour cette question. Thank you for the question. Well, perhaps as far as the cost of nuclear is concerned, there are two slightly different questions here. At the moment, we have a nuclear fleet, quite a broad one, which provides 70% of our decarbonized power, where the costs have already paid off. And the investments are really for rejuvenating that fleet to enable it to continue to function for a few more years to preserve the service life for rather longer. And it's true, that is a major investment because we're talking about 40 billion euros for those power plants. And those costs are nevertheless very competitive if you compare with other energy prices today. The question we have today is about tomorrow, the electricity mix tomorrow. As I was saying, we have this multi-annual program for up to the years up to 2028 to increase renewable generation, and up to 2035 to renew our power station fleet. Beyond 2035, we're going to have to introduce new power stations, and this is very complex, of course. We need to have initial outcomes within a year, integrating various mix scenarios. Some will focus much more on developing renewables with different scenarios where you have different weightings for wind energy, offshore, onshore, solar, and different shares accounted for by our nuclear power sector. We're reviewing the impact in terms of costs, but also total impact. For example, on the development of networks, because depending on what mix you have and the kind of distribution you need for what type of power, that will affect the nature of the transmission and distribution networks. So we have this very broad study which integrates all costs, and we've entrusted that to our Transport Network and Balancing Network Agency, FTE. Some of those studies are carried out together with the International Energy Agency, and that means that we have a pretty broad panorama of the technical, social, environmental, and cost aspects to base our decisions on as we develop our mix for the years after 2035. And of course, the costs of new nuclear reactors will be integrated into that study. There will be audits on cost forecasts for the nuclear power stations.
Daran anschließend ganz kurz, Dankeschön, Madame Mourlon, ganz kurz nochmal,
Thank you, Madame Mourlon. Before we come back to Ms. van Allevet, one question addressed to our Polish panelists, because you also pointed out that in order to phase out coal in Poland, apart from renewables, you also invest in nuclear. If you look at the cost that a new plant entails, would that also be one of the great challenges for you to actually use nuclear and continue to use nuclear?
I mean, obviously, the transformation of the energy system is a huge challenge, whatever the technology you choose, especially when you have such a starting point as we do in Poland, where 70% of our fleet is more than 30 years old. So we have a lot of investments that we need to carry out. We did also a comprehensive analysis of what were the different options available and how we could ensure at the same time a safe supply of zero-emission energy to our economy, to our society, and how we could minimize the investment costs, but not only the investment costs for the investor who is building the power plant, but also the investment cost that is borne by the society or by the state or by other actors in developing the appropriate grids and the appropriate infrastructure to transmit the system, and also taking into account the environmental costs associated with these different technologies. And when you look at all these elements in the equation, and that's the analysis that we did before proposing our draft 2040 energy policy, was that the best option we had to provide a stable baseload in the system that would be zero emission was nuclear energy. So obviously the challenge of the costs are significant. Investment costs upfront, it is generally speaking the challenge of this whole energy transformation, that it is very capital intensive, which is a huge challenge for an economy like Poland. But if we want to move to a climate neutral world, there is just no other option. We have to go for a zero emission energy system.
Frau von Ahlefeld, wenn wir jetzt mal
Ms. von Ahlefeld,
Sie haben selber davon gesprochen,
looking to you in Berlin, you talked about 65% renewables as our objective here in Germany, particularly as regards wind, onshore, both onshore and offshore projects. The federal government launched a number of projects and initiatives in this respect, but it's time and again said that this is not sufficient. Where would you say you still have to do something, still have to do more? Well, the main problem is that the planning and licensing procedures for wind are taking very, very long right now. And we are trying for ways and means to speed up these processes. It's not simple. It's not all that easy to have these discussions also with associations and NGOs who protect the environment, because obviously environmental protection plays a great role here, because we are entering sensitive habitats with our wind parks, with our installations. So we have to try and come to a good kind of compromise with associations that are for the protection of the environment. But we will also have to do something as regards the European Union and its environmental legislation. We have to explore whether there's more flexibility possible. Another problem is obviously how can we synchronize renewables and the expansion of renewables with our grid expansion. That too is a great challenge, because four big power lines, four big routes have to be established that transport wind-generated electricity to where it is most needed, namely in the south, in the industrial conurbations. This takes time, because after all, we live in a democracy. The citizens are to have their say. They should have their say. Politicians need to listen to them, need to review what they say, and that takes a lot of time. And that's, in a way, our biggest headache. We're very ambitious, but the procedures as such cannot be speeded up at will. Now, on taking people along, that's something that I would like to discuss with all of you. How can one actually see that this is a socially fair process, that people accept the energy transition? But perhaps let's go back to the renewables, because you all said how important this is to expand renewables in your respective countries, and that this ought to be in concert with others. If I talk about trying to cooperate with others, do this in concert with others, I'm thinking of the wind park strategy, particularly in the Baltic Sea. Where do you think one can do more and need to do more? And perhaps we start with Poland first, because I believe that this is your initiative, is it not?
Yes, and we see indeed a lot of potential for offshore wind, and one of the reasons why we see a lot much more potential in offshore wind is the challenge of social acceptance that you mentioned. We experienced that in Poland. I believe you can meet similar cases in other countries, that onshore wind was becoming problematic in many communities. It was complicated to carry out these investments, and we believe that offshore investments will be, from this perspective, more acceptable. Plus, the installations themselves will be producing more energy, so they're more efficient from the perspective. It's more efficient investment, and definitely, building an offshore wind capacity will require huge effort, not only financial, and we're working on creating the appropriate framework for supporting investors willing to take that risk, with creating a support scheme for those investments. But also it's really a logistical challenge. For Poland today, we have zero offshore wind capacity, and we're aiming to have 6 gigawatts by 2030. So we have also to develop a whole infrastructure to enable those investments in ports on the Baltic, in terms of grids to connect those new offshore wind farms to the grid. So it is indeed a huge challenge that requires as well cooperation, as we see, almost. I mean, most of the investment projects that exist today for offshore wind in Poland are involving different European companies from other member states. So we see it's also a very attractive opportunity for investors coming from other member states. So that their regional cooperation as well is very important.
Da geht die Frage dann auch direkt.
So my question now then goes to the other two panelists, Ms. von Annefeld. I mean, we too are bordering the Baltic Sea coast, so how important would it be for you to work together with Poland in this respect? It's very important to us because Poland is our direct neighbor. We believe, generate synergies. We can also provide experience because on offshore we do have a little bit of a lead in experience. We too have our very ambitious goals for 2030. We wish by 2030 we would like to be at 20 gigawatts and 2040 at 40 gigawatt. And obviously we concentrate here mainly on the Baltic Sea as well. So cooperation is for us of the essence, and this is also part of the issues that we address with our European partners at European level. What we see on a bilateral and multilateral level and their projects is that it's very, very difficult to coordinate the demands that we need to also integrate in these contracts, on guidelines to be introduced in these contracts on grids and so on. So we would hope for new standards to be adopted by the European Union so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we try to try to forge contracts with our partners. But yes, we would like to cooperate also at the European level. Madame Roland, you're not a country that is bordering the Baltic Sea, but you pointed out to the fact how important coordination is at the European level. So where do you see the greatest need for you in France?
If I take the example of onshore wind, which was raised by the other two speakers, it's true, we aren't by the Baltic, but we do have cooperation which was set up for North Sea onshore wind. We're participating in that actively. It's also important because we have a number of challenges in developing offshore wind. We also have some ambitious targets. In our program, we've set a target for 2028. I just mentioned those studies. In all the scenarios, we've tried to include the offshore technology. It's already been mentioned by the other two speakers on this panel. There are economic interests and technical interests involved. We have ambitious objectives and we certainly have challenges to meet. We're aware of the environmental challenges. Of course, this is very sensitive areas, as Stéphanie Adamfeld has said. But on the French side, those environmental sensitivities are perhaps less along the coast, but We do have different experience in different European countries, and this experience has already impacted strategies for offshore wind. But our challenges lie, for example, with fishing. And this is certainly something that worries the fishing community, and we have quite a big fishing community in France. So we're trying to come up with responses, and that's something we can do with other European countries. We very much value cooperation with others, also when it comes to developing and selecting technologies. That would not so much affect Poland and Germany, but we're also trying to set up Mediterranean cooperation, because offshore wind is also going to be a challenge for the Mediterranean, and also the North Sea cooperation has been valuable.
Offshore wind für alle drei unserer Partner entscheidend oder
So offshore wind seems to be essential for all three of our panelists in order to achieve the clean energy transition, also obviously with the necessary grid expansion. Let me look at one technology that all of you addressed in your first round of introduction, namely hydrogen. It seems to have a lot of fans right now. Innovative technology, it may create, if things work well, new employment, and if it's green hydrogen, which each and everyone seems to wish for, is linked to green energy. So how do you cooperate so that not each and everyone does his or her own thing, but that you feel that in those areas where there are synergies, we cooperate more, because there's going to be an enormous demand, and it will need a lot of effort to turn hydrogen into a green energy. Maybe Ms. van Alefeld would start first. Well, yes, that is a new technology, and obviously cooperation here is something that is needed, and to sort of sit together and reflect where might be good locations for electrolysis. We are very closely in contact with France on this, but basically we have to think in European terms. So Franco-German projects are always and invariably open to others to join. And as I see it, it's a huge opportunity to also integrate renewables very well into the future energy mix. If the future hydrogen can be stored, hydrogen can be used, for example, in power plants. It can be transported quite easily if we are able to sort of transform our gas infrastructure step by step to absorb hydrogen. So I think for all of us, it's an important future option that I think we need to address together. But a lot of things, as you quite rightly say, needs to be still developed. So where do you see, Madame Moulin, where do you see yourself with this?
Yes, it is the hope principle, but much more important than that, hydrogen is an energy vector, because it is a form of energy that can be produced, stored, transported, reused, and that gives us opportunities for flexibility in our energy systems, and opportunities for decarbonizing certain sectors which are otherwise difficult to decarbonize. In France, we think that the priority for using hydrogen would above all be in heavy freight mobility in medium and long term, and also decarbonization of industry. Of course, if we're going to achieve that decarbonization, we need decarbonized hydrogen based on carbon-free electricity. So there are several challenges there which we can tackle together at European level, especially with our neighbours, because for these technologies to emerge quickly at competitive prices, we're going to have to invest together, and that's what we're doing in developing the technological modules. So France has included in its recovery plan 6 billion of investment for hydrogen and technological modules, and technological bridges, with another 5 to following that. And we're hoping to work with our German neighbours on a major project, a common European project, to support research and the industrialization of these technology bridges, electrolyzers, the tanks, the materials we need to develop a hydrogen sector across Europe and to make sure that we can do this at a competitive price. This is a priority for us, and it's also a cooperation priority because when you're developing, the costs are going to be big, and we need to pull together to succeed at a European level.
And if we look to Poland, to what extent can Poland be already up front there in developing hydrogen as a source of energy? Or would you rather say, would rather concentrate right now on phasing out coal and what we need to do right now?
Hydrogen is obviously a very important element in our overall strategy to reach climate neutrality. As was said by previous speakers, it helps integrate better renewables in our energy systems. So that's one advantage for sure. I mean, Poland already today is actually a major producer worldwide of hydrogen. We're, I believe, third in Europe. But obviously the challenge is I believe twofold with hydrogen. First, we need to develop new technologies that will allow us to produce zero emission hydrogen, or at least to minimize the emissions associated with the production of hydrogen. And there are different technologies people are working on, using renewable energy and electrolyzers is one of them, but there are other technologies that could allow for the production of zero emission hydrogen. And we need a lot of innovation in this sector because the costs are still relatively high. So we need to take the costs down, obviously. And at the same time, we need to develop the applications for the use of hydrogen. We need to support growing demand in different sectors, to adapt the technologies that are used in industry or in long distance transport, as was mentioned, to increase the use of hydrogen there, and that can be done already today using the hydrogen that we are using today, regardless of its origin. But at the same time, as we are say pushing for more use of hydrogen in various sectors, we really need to invest in these new technologies, in these innovations that will allow us in the long run to be able to produce significant quantities of zero emission hydrogen.
Teilnehmer übrigens, nur mal kurz zwischen.
Incidentally, we have 640 participants now online, so we're delighted to see this. We have Sophie Moulin with us on this panel from the Ministry for Energy Change. We have Stephanie von Ahlefeld, Director General Energy Policy in our Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, and we have Adam Giburze-Trzynski from the Undersecretary of State in the Polish Ministry of Climate. Now that we've looked at a number of technologies, let us take a moment and reflect what this pandemic might destroy, but also what sort of new impetus it has possibly given, because we are at a historic crossroads. More money than ever before has been earmarked for this rebuilding effort, for the recovery effort, it is said that this needs to be invested in green investments so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So how big do you think is this opportunity, and also the chance that this is going to be a year of impetus to the energy transition that will truly make a difference? Ms. von Ahlefeld, what is your opinion on this? Well, it's exactly as you say. After the rebuilding, this recovery process needs to be used because we need to invest in those areas that are of central importance for the Green Deal. Nationally, we're discussing this very intensively, and we have identified that digitalization, artificial intelligence, hydrogen technology, that all of that ought to be part and parcel of a competitive and sustainable policy of the future, and these are our priorities. In the energy area, obviously, one needs to take a closer look at building, retrofitting, and this is exactly what the EU Commission has also proposed. They are working on this so-called renovation wave. We, at national level, have significantly increased our funding for retrofitting of buildings. We're also looking at public transport, promoting climate protection there. And as I said, building up hydrogen and a hydrogen economy also plays a role. Then I would like to mention electromobility and innovation premium for environmentally friendly vehicles. So the funding is there, and we concentrate very clearly on future-oriented areas within the Green Deal because we consider this to be a win-win situation. We create employment, and we're getting closer to the goal of a climate-neutral Europe. So that is clearly our thrust and our priority. But do you feel that there's a headwind at European level and German level where people say, well, but we're in a crisis, we simply cannot afford this? Or do you think it's rather an opportunity that particularly in the area of renewables, this is precisely where you can give a boost to competitiveness? So do you feel that there's a headwind? Well, not in the area of energy, but we have already, as I said, very much focused in our policies on these future-oriented areas. So each and everyone who wishes to take out investment will certainly not do this anymore and knows that he should not do this in coal-fired power plant, but that an investment into renewables, into hydrogen, is something that will be backed not only by us, but also by the European Union. The certificate prices, not only in the European ETS scheme, will rise. And if you want to be fit for purpose for the future, then you have to plan this. You have to factor this in your current planning. So in the energy sector, there is not that much of a headwind, but there are other areas, tourism, the hospitality sector, restaurants. Many now have the expectation that we will help them to weather this particular crisis, and these are certainly not all of them investments in the energy transition, but they are bridging sort of funds, but obviously they're very necessary too. Madame Boulon, if we look to Paris, you too have this question. What does this mean, social fairness in this energy transition? We've heard even more and louder voices in your country about this. If I think of the Gilets jaunes, if I think of your President Macron, who also call for a citizens forum that is to develop new ideas. So is it urgent to take your people along?
Of course, yes. I think it's urgent everywhere, to be honest. You can't do such an ambitious transition of the kind that Adam and Stephanie have described without being concerned and supporting social concerns and economic concerns that go with that. So if we want a fair transition for our citizens and we want to support their support for sustainable development, this is work we are pursuing very actively. There are some things we've set up. For example, we have a mechanism called the energy check-in in France, which means that even modest households can make a contribution to the energy transition. We've been looking at local development plans to see which areas have been most heavily impacted by energy transition. For example, where we are closing down coal-based power stations, so that we can develop plans for encouraging new industrial activities. And there are big movements, public movements, that have been thinking faster about these issues. As you mentioned, the citizens' forums that our president set up, where people are simply pulled out of the electoral registers to take part in these town hall meetings, if you like. So this is the subject of very intensive work involving the ministries, our members of parliament, and our civil society, including NGOs. We have some quite specific legislation. There's a law that will be addressing at the beginning of next year, a bill that's being put to Parliament about the involvement of civil society, and a lot of other mechanisms that are currently being set in place to accompany the transition. In our recovery plan, in a similar way to what they have done in Germany, we have a number of lines of action designed to make transition easier, with major funding to support decarbonization of industry by transforming processes. And the resistance that you mentioned, the resilience or resistance to some of these developments, can certainly be addressed by some of these mechanisms. We have a whole range of solutions to support the transition, and we know that this is going to remain an important issue, I think, throughout the transition period. We're only at the beginning now.
But sometimes I have the impression that you have to be courageous too, in order to change direction. I'm thinking of necessary change of industries, because new industries might then be more future-proof. Madame Hollande, this is again a question to you. In US Citizens Alliance, you've had some radical proposals. Should we be more courageous when it comes to achieving the energy transition?
I think that knowing which way we're going and what the strategy is very important for transition. And that's what we're doing. If you want to exit coal, and we want to do that by 2022, we're not in the same situation as Poland, of course. These are decisions that have been taken, are being implemented, and will be accompanied by various mechanisms. But if you're looking at other thermal vehicles, other decisions have been taken for 2040, will require the same kind of support. With industrial decisions, we know we want to move towards zero emissions by 2050, and what needs to be done will be done. For example, if you're looking at wind energy, aviation sector, we started some development work to support the aviation industry towards decarbonization by working on new fuels, new forms of propulsion, and deep changes in the structure of that industry. There is a clear desire to go this way, and I think at European level too, as we're seeing in political decisions taken at European level and by politicians in all our countries. But the process of implementation is being supported in many ways.
Thank you. Let me also ask the nuanced question to Poland, to Mr. Dzieboji-Czetwertynski. There are a lot of incentives in the context of the European Green Deal in order to support the countries in the transition. You've said yourself that due to Corona, urgency has increased in Poland, also in other countries, but particularly in Poland. How do you define the path towards climate neutrality by 2050 in order to show to the Commission that you are on board, but that you still need support?
Oh, I think the target of making Europe climate neutral by 2050 is shared by all of us. We all supported the conclusions that set that target in December last year. Obviously, The steps we'll need to take will be different in different member states, but we will also need much more action at European level, because Sophie mentioned just before a ban on internal combustion engines, and I know several member states are working on that. This is the type of decision that we need to take it at European level because of the single market. So we need to coordinate our actions, our policies, to make sure that we reach actually this target, and that it doesn't remain only a target on paper. I mean, we are discussing here, focusing very strongly on energy, and energy is obviously a big source of emission, and it's a major challenge, in particular in Poland. But climate neutrality is a challenge that concerns our entire economy, and we'll have to see changes not only in the energy sector but also in transport, in agriculture. And for these changes to happen, we'll need more European level actions, setting, for instance, standards, but also setting appropriate policies and measures to make sure that these other sectors also move towards climate neutrality. And for about the incentive part that you mentioned, it is obviously a particular challenge for us. Again, taking the example of cars. I mean, if you think about it, electric vehicles are roughly the same price all across Europe, but the average Polish worker will be earning between 2 and 3 times less than the average French or German worker. So obviously the hurdle this shift to a new clean vehicle represents for an average Polish family is obviously much bigger. So without appropriate support as well for these families, it will be difficult to ensure a transition. And I think this support is particularly important now in times of crisis, in times of coronavirus, because we should make sure that the policies we design are not creating extra burdens, in particular on the poorest and most vulnerable of our citizens.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you. Thank you to our 3 panelists. Participants, I would now like to encourage you to ask questions to the panelists. You can write them down in the chat. What would you like to know? You can ask your questions to Mr. Guy-Bourget-Czetwertynski, to Ms. von Ahlefeld and Ms. Mourlon. Go ahead. We have 10 minutes left before our lunch break, so please ask your questions. I will start with a first question, which has already reached us. We are seeing different approaches, and we've learned about them during the last hours. I'm talking about different energy mixes and different challenges at different national levels. And this is a question to all 3 of us. Do you also see complementary aspects in order to reach climate protection goals? Ms. Mourlon, let's start with you and a brief answer.
I think we're talking about complementarity between different countries here, aren't we? Because we represent different countries. Okay, in our presentations, you've seen that we're following the same objectives, and we have a great many opportunities to talk to our fellow Europeans about these things. I think consultation, collaboration at Europe is what enables us to organize synergies and cooperation and possibly complementarities. Complementarities will above all relate to experience, because history, engineering history is different in different countries. And we've also seen in our 3 different countries, through different technologies, different inputs, we've seen that some countries already have quite advanced experience to make available to others. In Poland, it's hydrogen, for example, and I think we can also look at these complementarities in industrial sectors. But I would talk about synergy rather than complementarity, because basically, even if we have different situations, we work within a European framework where we have a lot in common. And that is, above all, a common strategy that we are pursuing.
Wenn wir da auch noch mal bisschen spezifischer werden, wenn ich Frau von Ahlefeld
Could we get a bit more specific? Ms. von Ahlefeld, looking at EU state aid regulations,
geht das nicht? Inwiefern, so erreicht uns eine
and how far do you think do European state aid regulations have to be adapted in order to incentivize efficient climate protection? Yes, I will come to that in a second, but let me mention one area concerning complementary measures. If all EU member states invest in the development of renewable electricity, we will see complementary aspects because we don't have the same wind power or solar power in all EU member states. Demand differs from country to country too. So if we pool our forces here and if we engage in balancing our demand, everybody will profit from that. This is much better than optimizing our systems on our own. So I think there is true potential for complementation here. Concerning state aid, this will be a huge debate, especially concerning the Directorate General Competition. What does a state aid framework need to look like so that it makes possible long-term investments in climate protection? I'm also thinking about non-EU countries here and their commitment to climate protection. Right now, the state aid framework is of the opinion that the investments in climate protection technologies are digressive. But maybe we cannot keep this, given the fact that some non-EU countries might get more ambitious in this area. Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Czetwiczynski, where do you see potential concerning more complementary action?
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, I think that there is a lot of sectors in which we will need to take more action at EU level to make sure that we are on track of reaching our goal. In many cases, we will not be able to reach and to fully transform our economies if we don't agree on common standards and common measures to be taken at EU level to transform those sectors towards climate neutrality. I believe as well that pooling our resources together and moving together towards climate neutrality will make it more or easier for all of us together to reach that target. We know the huge innovations that are required, the huge investments that are necessary to meet these targets, and if we coordinate our efforts in that direction, I believe we can be much more efficiently getting to the end point we're all craving for.
Thank you. Let me turn to my next question. I don't know who of you would like to answer them first. My question is, Corona has shown that high marginal costs are involved. In Germany, for example, we have seen that coal power is not competitive anyway. So the question is, should we not just let the markets work? Maybe this could be a question to Ms. Ahlefeld. Of course. The market is always a good tool if this leads to results. I've already mentioned this. We have introduced a fuel emission trading scheme in areas in which the EU emission trading scheme is not existent yet. And I have the impression that this promotes innovation. Many actors start thinking about how we can achieve climate protection more quickly. However, in the area of renewable electricity, we have very ambitious goals, and they can not only be achieved by way of the EU emission trading scheme. And that is why we in Germany have launched a quite comprehensive program on renewable electricity, and it is quite expensive. However, let's hope that if emission trading leads to higher prices, prices for renewable electricity will fall. This is what we are working on, and we are doing this by forcing them into a competitive system. We have auctions for renewable energies, and like this, we have seen considerable decreases in costs. I think that the price for renewable energies is quite low right now, also due to COVID. I would like to ask the same question to Sophie Mourlon. Should we let the markets work more in terms of an energy transition, or is this not the right idea?
Le marché a déjà une très large place. L'intégration des marchés de l'énergie au niveau européen.
The market already plays a very large role in this. It's well integrated into the European market, and there's plenty of efficient scope for balancing in the short term. And as Stephanie just said, for achieving these complementarities in production across Europe. I think this already functions quite well. The European trading scheme has supported that process. But something that I'm sure our listeners are well aware of, the market alone these days isn't enough to achieve the energy transition, because all the costs, especially the climate costs of the various different technologies, aren't necessarily factored in these days to costs. And the benefits of having a balanced mix, above all, if we only pursue the market's way of doing things, would not be optimal. But as you said, there are some sectors, the renewables sector, for example, where costs have already been falling. That's not the case across the board, certainly with renewables. But I think that transition will happen increasingly with less public support. But as Stephanie was just saying, Europe is not isolated. And also, you can't go very far alone in energy transition. And I think there'll be a period where public policy will have to play a role in order to accelerate and guide the energy transition, especially sectors where markets function not adequately.
We've almost come to an end. A last short question to Germany and Poland. We've already talked to Sophie Mourlon concerning an increase in the acceptance of the energy transition, buzzword Citizens Convention. And this convention has come up with almost 150 proposals. Would this also be an option for Germany and Poland? I'm thinking of new governance structures, for example, in order to promote the acceptance of the energy transition. Mr. Guy-Bourget-Czetwertynski, please.
think it's definitely of huge importance to involve our citizens in the policy as we design. First of all, because we need to be able to cater for the different expectations that we have in society, not only in terms of climate action, but also energy poverty, competitiveness for our economy that ensures jobs for our society. So we need to be able to combine all these elements, and a lot of the changes that will be required. I mentioned earlier, transport, changes in mobility, but also in agriculture, in many sectors will involve or will have to involve also behavioral changes in the society. And it is only when these will be expected or accepted by the population that the transition will be made possible. So involving our citizens in the design of our policies is crucial. We see that also in Poland at another level in the development of renewables, that programs we have created to help incentivize modernization of individual households, and especially installation of renewable energy sources in individual households, have been hugely successful, and it clearly shows there is a willingness in the society to transform our energy mix, to make those investments, and it is our responsibility to use that, and to use that energy in a way that makes the system function properly, able to still cater for the need of the population, and create the appropriate incentives for investors to carry out those projects that we need for the transformation of our energy.
Anreize schaffen hat Herr
To create incentives. This is what Mr. Guy Bourget-Chetvertensky said. Last question to you, Ms. von Ahlefeld. New governance structures. We've already heard from France concerning this. What can you imagine here for Germany? Do we also need a citizens' convention? I believe that the debate is a bit different in Germany. Maybe we don't have a citizens' convention that deals with all topics. We had a coal commission, we have the so-called citizens' dialogue, we have an action alliance, climate protection, and many citizens are involved here. We are also thinking in the context of the Renewable Energy Sources Act, how we can involve citizens more when it comes to wind power. So these are individual approaches. I think that an approach similar to the one in France would need a vigorous debate, also involving political parties who perceive themselves as the representatives of the people. So you should ask this question to the parliamentary group chairs. Yes, we might do that. Thank you to Stefanie von Ahlefeld, Head of the Department of Energy Policy at the Federal Ministry of Economy for Economic Activities. Thanks to Sophie Morland, Director for Energy at the Directorate General for Energy. And thanks to Mr. Guy Bourget-Chetvertensky, Minister of State at the Polish Ministry of Climate Affairs. And thanks to all of you who are listening to us and for asking your questions. I think that we have seen 3 countries with different challenges and starting points. After the lunch break, our online lunch break, we will talk about other topics. Barbara Kostolnik will be your host then, and later during the afternoon, we will also talk about the financing of the energy transition. And we will take a look at the practical level then. For now, I wish you a great lunch break, and we'll see each other again at 2:00 p.m.